My name is Arthur Wilder. Okay, I'm part of the Wilder family on Salgree. We live on Salgree right now. Yeah, and my mother and father, both of them is from James Island. Okay.
So how long have you been involved personally with this cemetery? Your whole life? Or?
No, I got involved with the cemetery after I moved back home, and that was in 2001 or two. I left home in 1963, and I went in the military, and then after I left the military, I went to California, and I spent a career in California, and then got married and had family in California. Then when I retired, I moved back home to a slower life, because we all know that when you live in those big cities, it can just weigh you down, and then you can only communicate with family by phone. So I moved back home for a slower lifestyle.
So how much of your family moved back with you?
Everybody that my family moved out of California, me and my wife moved back and bought a house here on Salgree, where I grew up at. And my kids, one of them is in Georgia, Atlanta, Georgia. She's a teacher. And the other one stayed in California for a while and moved to Arizona, Flagstaff, Arizona. So he went into real estate, and that's where the family are. Yeah.
So when you moved back to Charleston, after being away for so long, what drew you back to this cemetery?
Well, what drew me back to the cemetery is when I came back home, and for some reason I went and visit my mother's grave, because I got, like on Mother's Day, you take flowers to the grave and stuff. So when I came back here, I found out that the grave was what I call, the whole cemetery was raggedy. When I say raggedy, was, bushes and weeds, and everything was all over the place. So I went back to the church, and I asked the deacon of the church what happened. Why don't they clean out the graveyard? Why don't you clean up the graveyard? And he said, they don't bury people there anymore. But I said, well, why don't you clean up the graveyard? He said, we don't bury people there anymore, right? Yeah. So that ain't got nothing to do with it. Yeah. And he told me that because they don't bury any people there, anyone there anymore, they don't clean up the graveyard. So I said, well, I'm gonna clean up my mother and my father and my brother and my sister. And then I got grandparents, and the whole family was there, and not only the Wilder family, but the Smalls family, where my mother came from. And that's how I started cleaning up the grave. And then not only did I clean up my family grave, but then all of them cousins. And then if I clean up the cousin grave, heck, I'm cleaning up, they're going a third of the grave, because technically we are related one way or another. So I look at the names that is in the graveyard, and for somehow we are related to about 5 or 6 different families. Yeah. So that's how I started cleaning up the graveyard.
So did you get some help from the beginning, or was it a one-man operation?
It was a one-man operation, and then I got help for a while. And then there was a lady in New York by the Chisholm. She sent money to her sister, who gave it to me, so I can hire somebody to help me. And I was doing this by myself for a while. Then I started hiring a couple of guys to help me, put the leaves on a tarp and drag it to the side and burn it up. Originally we was going to bag it up and put it to the road, but that was, too much work. Yeah. So we just pull it over on the side and burn it, and that's what I'm doing right now. Yeah.
So when did you first hear that the county was planning to build a library here?
I first heard about that when Councilman Anna Johnson, she was running for, I think it was re-election. And I went down to one of the campaigns she was putting on, and she was talking about the library, and she had, I forgot the political opponent of hers at that time, and they was debating where's the best place to put the library. And she said, well, she would rather have it on Grimble, and the other person on Grimble Road, and the other one wanted on her opponent, I think it was Fort Johnson or Camp Road, he wanted on. So everybody said, well, it'd be easier to get to it on Grimble. So because Councilman Johnson won the election, she got the library going there. And that's where she got me involved in this, and I told her about the graveyard, and I told her I would keep it cleaned up, yeah.
So when you first heard about the library project and there were plans to build a library basically next door to the cemetery, what was your first reaction? Did you think that was a good idea, or potentially might be encroaching on the cemetery or endanger the cemetery?
I thought it was a good idea, but I also thought it would be encroaching on the cemetery. I thought that they would bring the library closer to the graveyard and then creating a parking lot right in front of the graveyard, because they said being that the graveyard is there and it's not being cleaned up, then the county might decide, away, it's going to go ahead and bulldoze that area and put a parking lot there.
Because that's probably what would have happened 30, 40, 50 years ago.
Well, this is one of the problems that we have with the graveyard here on James Island now. Now, you've heard of Eugene Frazier.
Oh, sure.
Eugene Frazier was telling us that there are 13 graveyards on James Island. 13. And most of these graveyards, all but 2, has been either bulldozed over and somebody put apartment house on it, and it grew up in bushes, and nobody know that it exists. And you recall there used to be an airport. There used to be an airport right off of a place called, well, anyway, over in that direction. I can remember.
On James Island.
On James Island. There was a Grimble Airport.
Right.
And there's a graveyard back there. Yeah, and Eugene Frazier and I started an attempt to go back there one time, but I think because of the weather, for some reason, we turned around, we didn't go again. But I was telling Eugene Frazier, I recall that me and my brother visited that airport, the graveyard, way back in the late 50s or early 60s. Yeah, at that time, there was almost no tree on James Island because everybody was planting. And we was using a wood stove. And on Solid Green, where we was at, all the trees had been cut down. We used to have to go to Grimble to cut wood and bring it back. And one of the things that we did was that we went to the back there by the airport to cut some wood back there. And I remember my brother showed me that there was old cemetery, old gravestone back there. And I said, whoa, there's a graveyard back here. Right. And for somehow, the name of the graveyard was Devil Nest Cemetery.
Right, we were just talking about that.
Yeah, and you said, well, wait a minute, Devil Nest? It's almost like because that graveyard was there, during the slavery time. And so the slave owner really insulted his slave by naming the graveyard, hey, bury that dead slave that I don't need anymore. Bury him back there in Devil Nest. Like a double insult. Exactly. Yeah. So that's why, I remember Devil Nest, and that's a hell of a name for a graveyard. Yeah. So that's an example of a graveyard that went back there and grew up in bushes.
Well, so I'm glad that this is one that it's not in danger of being bulldozed and forgotten.
Yeah.
So, on a personal note, are you happy with the way the county has handled this project, or?
Well, yeah, I am happy the way the county handled it, but technically I don't know too much about how the county handled it. All I know is the county put the library here and they didn't, bulldoze over the graveyard, and out of respect. And I always wonder, the Grimble, who owned the property, and I was told when I moved back home in 2001 or 2 that the Grimble didn't allow anybody to be buried there anymore. So because they stopped people from being buried there, then that's how the graveyard maintenance went down the drain. Right.
Well, yeah, and that leads me, pardon me for interrupting you.
Go ahead.
One of the things I'm real curious to know about is when you were a boy, when you were growing up, did you hear stories from elders in the community about how this particular graveyard came to be, its origins, and the earliest people who were buried here?
No, I don't know. No, I never heard a story how it came to be. Not when I grew up. But all I know is that they buried people here, and I went to a couple of the funerals. And then there's always a couple of things that stand out to you, and then about the funeral and the burial, and also just passing by the graveyard itself. That was another story. But all the myth and stuff like that. Now, a couple stories about happened was I recall two burial. Okay, one of them that the burial was that my granddaddy was buried at, and I remember as a little boy, because it was someone death, somehow that staying in your mind. I don't care how small you was at, and when they buried him, they took all the dining utensil that he used, the cups and the saucers.
The last things that he touched.
The last thing that he touched, and put it around the grave. And I always wonder, whoa, that teacup and all that stuff like that, And that's what I recall about his grave and that, right?
So they didn't go in the casket with him, they went around the grave?
This one was around the grave. Now I heard my older brother say in some cases they put it in the casket, And I also remember that another person died, and this guy that died, he was, he was a heavy drinker, as we said, and he and all his partners usually get together and drink that moonshine on the weekend and raise hell, and then next day, they're all friends. Well, he died, and when they buried him, lowered a coffin down in the grave, his friends, the drinking buddy, was standing around the grave. One of them reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a half pint of moonshine, and he drank half of it and poured the other half in the grave and said, "This is my partner." His last drink with his partner.
Yeah.
That's an example of, the kind of stuff that you see at that time, or I recall.
Right.
Yeah. And another thing that I recall was they had what we call like a repast. And a repast is, I forgot the other term that used. In other words, the before the funeral, they have like the body at the church, and they have all the people come and say something over it. Well, at that time, they didn't have it at the church. They had it at within a community center, what we call a lodge hall. And then this particular person, they had, the casket out there, and the family was, around the casket, and they had a family member standing on the right of the casket and one on the left. And there was a little child. They picked the little child up and passed him over the casket.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and that was say the dead supposed to take any infirmity the child have with him, and or keep the child from getting sick. And that's one of the things that I recall.
Wow, that's an amazing story.
Yeah.
So you mentioned lodge halls.
Yeah.
And I know on James Island, specifically right around this area, there were several lodge halls.
Yeah.
And so were those, I've always wondered, was that a lodge associated with a specific Freemasonry group, or was it just a community center, a general?
I think it was a community center. I don't think, because we didn't hear about the Mason until later. I think back in the early or late in the 60s, we heard about the Mason. And the only reason why we had heard about the Mason is that some people wear a ring.
Right.
Yeah, and I don't know why is it that somehow, see, like the economic condition was a little bit better than those non-Mason. Yeah, and they had some kind of a Mason ring. But the lodge hall was just like a community center, and we had all kind of things that we had. We had birthday parties, there was wedding, and then like the funeral service, and then we had on May Day, we had the May pole that the kids would go down around there and raise the flag and say all kinds of stuff like that.
I've seen a couple of drum and fife groups that or attached to specific lodges.
Yeah, there was one that was attached to Solid Green Lodge Hall. Yeah, and they used to come up there and play drum, and they had a drum, a flute, bugle, and something else. So there's about 4 different instruments, and they used to come and play at the Lodge Hall during, I think it's 4th of July or Labor's Day, one of the 2 special occasion. Yeah, and that's what we would have. That was the Lodge Hall. Okay. Yeah.
That was something I'm just personally curious about.
Yeah, the Lodge Hall and the community center now is used interchangeable.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, getting back to the cemetery here, one of the things we're going to want to do in a few moments is to just walk around a little bit, and I don't know if Macy's already done this, but get some footage of you and me just kind of looking over some of the graves, some of the wilders that are already here.
Yeah.
But I know there's a question that Macy wants to ask, and I could put it in my own words, but I think she puts it better.
Oh.
So I'll let you ask.
Yeah, so for people who are coming to the Baxter-Patrick Library for the first time, and it's the first time maybe on James Island and they don't know a lot about this history, and they wander over to the cemetery, what do you hope they take away just about the history of the community, the history of James Island? What do you hope they learn from visiting the cemetery for the first time?
Okay, one of the things that I hope they would learn is that to look at the date on some of those tombstones, and it shows that some of those things predate the emancipation, and that's how long they've been being buried here. So you can imagine how many people are buried there. Now, according to Eugene Frazier, said there's maybe another quarter of it, whatever the amount, the gravestone you would have there, that many gravestone is not, there's no grave here because, no gravestone because of the economic condition of the person who was buried there. They didn't have any money for a gravestone. So somehow, in some places you see a iron rod coming up out of the ground. That was because the person didn't have money for a gravestone. And a lot of times there was just a brick thing. And there was also a wooden cross. So, of course, over a period of time, the cross rotting down and dissipate. That's what I want them to see. And also on the gravestone, you would see, the history you see a certain amount of people was veterans of World War I, World War II, and I think there were 1 or 2 persons here from the Vietnam War.
That's right.
Yeah, and those are the kind of things you would see. And another thing is that you see there was a gravestone of a few deacons and a preacher, so you would know, some of the people that is buried there, are buried here. Yeah.
So what, I know there are a number of African American churches nearby this cemetery.
Yeah.
Is there any one church that seems to have a stronger or longer relationship with this cemetery?
No, I think what you do is not the church, it's the family. Yeah. And one of the reasons why I say is the family because of Grimble, like when Grimble you owned the slaves, all the family of ex-slaves is buried in Grimble graveyard. For instance, I had a list of, for instance, the family like the Smalls, the Chisholm, the Prelo, not the Richardson, the Prelo, and the McNeil. Yeah, okay. Yeah. These are the people who indirectly was from the Grimble, the Grimble slaves. Yeah. So that's who it is, not the churches. Right. Now, further over in some of the places that certain churches have buried their members here. Yeah.
So there are several churches in the area that have connections to this through the different families.
Yeah, through the different family. Because for instance, if my mother was a Smalls, all the Smalls buried there, but she was from Baptist church. And then the Methodists could have had the McNeil, and the McNeil is buried here. Yeah. Yeah, and one of the other things I was going to ask you about is the myth and the legend that people used to have, like ghosts and superstitious things like that. Right. That's why when you walk around in the graveyard, you would see coins on the graveyard. Because some people believe that, you put coins on the grave. One of them is if you put a quarter on there, he put a quarter with the head turned, tail is showing, or someplace a penny with the head was showing. That means that this person who believes in the superstition, if you put a quarter on there and you said, you did my family wrong, you put a quarter on the grave, he said, they hope something happened to you terribly. Mm-hmm. Well, if he put a penny on there, he just hoped that you stumble and fall and hurt yourself. It's not as painful. Right. So those are the kind of myths that you would see. And some people believe in that myth. Mm-hmm. And when I first started cleaning up the graveyard here, I had a guy helping me cleaning it up, and he wanted to stop and tell me, said, I had promised him $20. Mm-hmm. And he wanted me to give him some money before we finished so he can go out and buy a beer. And I said, hell no. And he insisted. I said, no. I said, And after about the third time, I called him up. I said, "Hey, look on the grave. There's about 85 cents on there. Go ahead and get it, and go get a bed." You know, he said,
No.
"Well, no,
You taking that money?
he ain't gonna take that damn money because he don't want a ghost knocking on his window, waking him up." See, people believe to those kind of a myths. Now, over a period of time, we, heard of there's certain things that we didn't do at the cemetery.
Okay.
Number one, you didn't step on the grave. If you step on the grave, that was an insult. See, and you didn't take dirt out of the graveyard. I mean, you walk around with your shoes, you get dirt in your shoes, you're supposed to dust it off before you leave. Now, when we was in Gresham Egg School back in the early 60s, we used to go and practice for football, and then we used to walk home over the solid grade, so we had to walk this road. And a lot of time, the football practice is almost over, it's almost dark. Now, there was a path right where this road is.
Yeah.
It goes straight through right behind Grimble Graveyard at the football field, so we used to walk that path, so it'll shorter cut than coming all the way around. But we would be talking and bragging and making a bunch of noise. But when we got to that corner where the graveyard is, you didn't have to say nothing. Everybody climbed up and didn't say nothing, got quiet until we got to that road over there. You know, you didn't make no noise when you come past the graveyard. See? And that kind of a stuff, and you believe in ghosts, because if you be walking by the graveyard at night down that path, and then all of a sudden you hear something rustle in the graveyard, I mean, a tree branch could fall and you say, "Oh, hell." You're like, be quiet, ghosts is talking. Yeah. Those are the kind of things that comes with the myth, that all the things that we was told.
Well, that's important stuff for the upcoming generations to hear.
Yeah.
To understand how this place was thought about in the past.
Yeah, that's all those things come in there because of all of those things that the older people told us about. Yeah, and things that we witnessed. Yeah.
Well, I don't know about you, but I'm pretty excited about the future of the cemetery and the library and that partnership.
Yeah.
And from my perspective, the history of this cemetery looks like it's in good hands for the future. Are you going to continue to be involved with the cemetery?
Yeah, I'm going to continue involved, and I would like to see that, like where they got all these stakes for the grave, I would like to put these cross there because, see, I put these cross there because we went to I forgot the name of the group that Councilman Johnson took us all the way to Beaufort. Is it Beaufort? Well, I think it's Beaufort. And a person with that ground penetration radar came by and identified some of these graves. And that's why we was able to put the cross out there by some of these graves, yeah.
Well, so you'd like to see continuing in that direction towards identifying and marking?
Marking the grave. Yeah, and I was hoping that I can convince some of the family members who have to get a brick with their name, with their family members on it, and put it at the place where the cross is, so they would know over the period of time, because if the cross, if something disappeared, the brick would always be there.
Right, and if another one of these trees falls, then they're going to lose some more markers.
Yeah. And that's another thing that I thought that Councilman Johnson would be here, because I wanted her to somehow get the county to get a tree trimmer to cut this tree down that break off.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you know when this one got trimmed? It looks like it had some work done on it recently. Somebody came by with a chainsaw.
I know. I cut a limb off, a big limb. No, which one? No, I don't know who did this, but there was one of these big tree, a limb here. I got it cut down a long time ago. Mm-hmm. Yeah. See, and I sure would like to see if there would be more trim as much as possible, because all the leaves cause all kind of a problem. Yeah. And anytime there's another storm again, there's always a possibility that another tree fall.
Yeah. Well, maybe this is just the beginning of the next phase.
I hope so. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Anything else you want to add to the story?
No, I guess no. I just hope that the people who have someone buried here, I would hope that they would visit the cemetery more often and just help clean up their family grave. Yeah, because no one paid for it because as I said, there was this Chisholm family, and she is the only one that give me money that I can get 2 guys to come out there and help me, and I can only work them 1 hour, and they're ready to go home. Yeah, so I got to go back and forth and back and forth, and by the time I get one side clean, it's time to start over on the other side. Yeah.
Well, it's an ongoing effort. Well, thank you so much for your efforts to preserve this cemetery and for coming out today to share part of the story and share your insights. It's extremely useful information.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for the library.